Finally, after 30 years of armed conflict, the DRC and Rwanda are finally sitting down to negotiate peace. Rwanda will stop funding terror in eastern Congo. Congo's resources will finally stay in control of Congolese people, and a new day is on the horizon. Justice will be served. Right? Well, by the end of this video, you'll have all the information you need to understand what's at stake with this current peace deal. We'll go over what the peace deal even is, who the major players are, the backdrop for the peace deal over the past 3 decades, including previous peace processes that haven't quite panned out, potential spoiler alert, and we'll end with the implications of this peace deal. What might this mean moving forward for Congolese people? And more importantly, what does it look like in the context of justice for Congolese people? Because at the end of the day, that should be what we're all fighting for. I'm Kojo, we are Friends of the Congo, and this is everything you need to know about the 2025 peace deal between Congo and Rwanda. In order to understand what's happening in Congo right now, you need to understand what's been happening in Congo for the past 30 years. Basically, since 1996, the Congo, more specifically, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, has been the target of 2 international wars, a refuge for those seeking safety from genocide, the site of the longest ongoing humanitarian crisis in modern history, and a hotspot for the illicit mining that fuels much of our modern technologies, from smartphones to electric cars, and so much more. After the 1994 Rwanda genocide, in which over 800,000 people were killed in just 100 days, millions of Hutu families, mostly mothers, children, and elders, fled westward across the border into the neighboring DRC. Since this moment, Rwanda has used the presence of Hutu refugees in Congo as an excuse to violently invade Congo, which they did with their ally in Uganda in 1996 during the First Congo War, and then again from 1998 to 2003 in what is known as the Second Congo War. Between these 2 incursions into Congolese territory, an estimated 6 million people have died in Congo, either as a direct or indirect consequence of war. According to several UN reports, mass graves can be found all over Congo. In addition to the deaths, over 7 million Congolese people are currently internally displaced within their own country, and for decades, Congo has been regarded as the rape capital of the world, given the way invading militaries and militias have used rape as a weapon of both physical and psychological warfare to terrorize and destabilize the psyche of an entire population. At a certain point during the conflict, specifically between 2003 and 2006, it was estimated that a woman or girl in Congo was raped every 46 seconds. And that's after the wars are supposed to have ended. Even though the Second Congo War ended in 2003, the violence never really stopped. In fact, it continues to this day. The first 3 months of 2025 marked a significant escalation in the conflict when Rwandan troops and their M23 rebel militia successfully captured eastern Congo's 2 largest cities, Goma and Bukavu. Over 7,000 Congolese have been killed in Congo this year alone as a result of just these 2 takeovers. And as of the recording of this video, June 2025, these Rwandan-backed militias continue to occupy the 2 cities, having installed their own governments, possibly with plans to continue their bloody campaign westward all the way to the DRC capital of Kinshasa. So as you can see, the need for peace in Congo is urgent, it's immense, and it's been a long time coming. Ostensibly, the goal of a peace deal is to resolve a conflict. So if we're going to talk about the peace deal, we need to talk about 1, who is at the table, and then 2, who's at the table by association. As I mentioned earlier, the 2 main parties here are the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. The DRC's involvement is pretty straightforward. In March of 2025, the Congolese government reached out to the United States seeking an end to Rwandan-backed rebel incursions, especially from M23. We'll get to them in a bit. If you'll remember, the DRC has been plagued by decades of foreign-backed rebel activity. particularly in the mineral-rich eastern region of the country. Since the escalation of the violence in early 2025, DRC President Felix Tshisekedi's administration has faced growing pressure from his own people to demonstrate stronger governance and restore state control in eastern Congo. Besides the explicit call to action to end the violence, the DRC is pushing for regional stability, the protection of its territorial sovereignty, and control over its mineral wealth. In the midst of the occupation, the DRC government is also aggressively seeking to nationalize and formalize mineral extraction and trade in its own country. But much of these sectors are currently largely controlled by foreign actors and illicit networks, in which Rwanda plays a really important role. So what's with Rwanda? Rwanda is the player on the other side of the table. They're accused of arming, financing, and directing M23 rebels operating in eastern Congo. An accusation, by the way, that's supported by an overwhelming body of evidence that's been collected over the decades. Now, a crucial point here is that throughout this peace process, Rwanda is negotiating directly with the DRC as a state actor, not via M23. If you're relatively new to this conflict in Congo, then you might be asking something along the lines of, what even is M23? I thought we were talking about Rwanda. And that's good because it means you're paying attention. This next bit might be one of the most important things for you to understand about how Rwanda's been able to get away with destabilizing Congo for the past 30 years. So pay close attention. Pretty much non-stop, ever since Rwanda and Uganda formally withdrew their armies from Congo in 2003, they've continued to spread violence and destabilize eastern Congo through what are called proxy militias. Proxy militias, often referred to as rebel groups, are armed groups that technically operate independent of any country or military, but who are sustained by the funding of state and corporate actors to essentially do their bidding. M23 is one of the largest, most heavily armed, and the most well-organized proxy militias in Congo, closely linked to Rwanda as their main benefactor. By the way, the M23 situation is a whole thing. We could get into it, but if you'd like to know more about what's going on there, let us know in the comments. That said, exhaustive reports from reputable research institutions like the UN, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and even the US State Department go back decades outlining the ways in which Rwanda has been supporting rebel activity in eastern Congo by arming, financing, and again, even directing their activities. But why would Rwanda fund this kind of destabilization? Well, according to Rwanda, they're protecting ethnic Tutsi people in Congo. This goes back to the Rwandan genocide. But that's not even close to what the evidence, including so much eyewitness testimony on the ground from Congolese people in the region, says is happening. In a nutshell, proxy militias kill and terrorize Congolese communities off of their lands that often sit atop the most mineral-rich earth in the world. The militias then control these lands where mines are set up, resources are extracted from the ground, and shipped across the border to Rwanda, where they're sold on international markets for extraordinary profits. Like I said, we can talk more about that if you want, but without getting too far off track. Despite all the evidence that Rwanda has been stoking ongoing violence in eastern Congo at least since 2003, Rwanda has reflexively denied any involvement with the M23. In the past, this has made even the act of finding a meaningful starting point for negotiations very difficult, letting Rwanda remain off the hook and unaccountable for the problems it's created in Congo. So the fact that all parties in this peace deal are recognizing Rwanda as the primary aggressor at the table and not M23 really is a big deal. Rwanda has also long operated in Congo with Western diplomatic and financial cover. Addressing Rwanda directly highlights that all the major actors involved in these negotiations, the DRC, Rwanda, the US, who by the way is Rwanda's largest and most powerful ally and donor, all of them recognize Rwanda's role as the de facto real force behind the M23 militia. This brings us to the US, the third of our major actors at the table. The US is the chief diplomatic broker in these negotiations, facilitating the key negotiations between the DRC and Rwanda. I won't get too much into it here, but it's important to note that the US's role as a neutral third party in these negotiations is quite contradictory, having a classic history of both condemning human rights abuses and, as I mentioned earlier, supporting Paul Kagame's Rwandan government through military aid while fully knowing that his government has been using the funds to terrorize Congo since 1996. However, the former Biden administration and the current Trump administration appear strongly motivated by Congo's strategic minerals to broker a deal that works out well for the US. This drive is rooted in how essential Congo's minerals are to the green energy transition, i.e., the profits of US-based tech corporations, as well as gaining upper hand in their geopolitical competition with China, whose foothold in Congo's minerals market is dominant. The US wants to secure more of Congo's supply chain market share and prevent Chinese dominance, and that might be a price that Congo is very willing to pay in exchange for security guarantees against Rwanda. Alright, so if we flesh all of this out in this video, it's easily going to be 2 to 3 times longer than it already is, so I won't cover it here. But if this video gets 100 likes, we'll do a part 2 on the critical minerals deal that's coming out of this peace deal that the US is pushing for with Congo. If you'd like to know more about that, you know what to do. Just keep in mind, again, that the US is not neutral in these negotiations. It's clearly positioning itself, as it has been working on for years, to control and legitimize future mining access and operations in Congo, most likely through American companies, while presenting itself as a peace broker. Those are the big 3 that you need to know about. Additional players in these negotiations include the United Arab Emirates, who helped broker a ceasefire in March 2025 following Rwanda's initial invasion of the Congo. Their sovereign wealth fund makes them a heavy financial counterweight to China and an attractive investor for both the DRC and the US to develop Congo's supply chain infrastructure. China, whose presence looms large over the negotiations, despite them not being directly involved at all. China's growing dominance on the global stage and established dominance in Congo's mining sector could lead to significant shifts in current DRC-China dynamics, depending on how the deal ultimately pans out. Our first non-state actors, Cobalt Metals, is a US-based mining company, heavily backed by venture capital tech names such as Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. Also not directly involved in the negotiations, Cobalt Metals is something of a trial run for the US on the critical minerals side of things. Essentially, what they're promising is to ethically mine critical minerals in Congo using clean tech and geospatial analysis. If you know what all that means, good for you. But the main takeaway is that their success or failure within these negotiations and within the implementation of their strategy is going to strongly influence whether the US brokered peace deal is seen as a legitimate path to sustainable development in Congo, or just a rebranded form of resource extraction under new managers. We'll see about all that. So now we get to the peace deal itself. Again, in March of 2025, DRC President Felix Tshisekedi reached out to the US to broker a peace deal that could bring an end to Rwanda's decades of violence in eastern Congo, and in exchange, Congo would offer the US greater access to its critical minerals. This outreach came as a response to the escalation of violence and Rwandan aggression into the DRC that we mentioned earlier, culminating ultimately in the full-scale captures of 2 of Congo's largest cities, Goma, the capital of North Kivu, and Bukavu in the South Kivu province. Now, y'all know that the US stayed jonesing for those minerals, so President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio got right to work brokering a deal. Again, with the explicit understanding that the US will help negotiate peace between the DRC and Rwanda on the condition that the DRC would ensure greater access to its own critical minerals for the US. So on April 25th, representatives from both the DRC and Rwanda signed a 6-point Declaration of Principles in Washington, D.C., outlining the framework for the peace agreement. It's important to note that the initial framework is not the final peace deal. It's literally just a starting point for negotiations. But it gives us a great sense of what everyone is working towards and has been working towards throughout these negotiations. So let's hit each point real quick. According to the US State Department website, the 6 points of desired outcomes are: first, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and governance, where the DRC and Rwanda acknowledge each other's sovereignty and establish borders, and commit to reaching a resolution for peace without threatening the validity of those borders. Second, security concerns, where both nations acknowledge their security concerns, including mutual interests, their own mutual interests, in decreasing the activity of non-state armed groups in their respective territories. And instead, they pursue peace, security, stability, all of which would lead to more commercial trade and regional economic cooperation. The third point is what is referred to as regional economic integration framework, where they commit to a phased framework that provides both Congo and Rwanda with expanded foreign trade and investment to ensure that both prosper from the region's natural resources through mutually beneficial partnerships and investment opportunities. This tenet specifically cites the launch or expansion of significant investments, including those facilitated by the US government and US private sector. Fourth, the return of IDPs, internally displaced persons, and refugees, where they commit to facilitate the safe return of refugees and internally displaced persons to their original homes once peace has been restored to those areas. The fifth point is a commitment to support MONUSCO, the United Nations peacekeeping mission in the DRC, and other functions that will support the implementation of United Nations Security Council Resolution 2773. This resolution, issued on February 21st, 2005, less than a month into the recent invasion of Goma, was the UN's response to the violence. And among other things, it essentially reaffirms the DRC's right to control and govern its own lands, as well as affirms that Rwanda should immediately withdraw its troops from Congo and do so unconditionally, as well as end their support of M23. And the sixth and final point just outlines a commitment by both parties to draft peace agreements for each other to review along the lines of existing peace processes across a number of networks for both parties to, again, mutually review by May 2nd, 2025. As you can see, there's a lot going on here. But in short, the Declaration of Principles as a starting point for negotiations just outlines a commitment from both nations to respect each other's territorial sovereignty, end support for armed groups, and work together to stabilize the Congo, with additional details really just describing pathways towards making all of this happen. If you pay close attention to the sixth point of the declaration, it calls for the DRC and Rwanda to, quote, commit to coordinate through existing channels to generate an initial draft peace agreement. Existing channels? Well, the channels that Washington is referring to here include a number of separate peace processes that have been initiated since as recently as December 2024. The Luanda Accords, the Nairobi process, the Doha talks, the EAC SADC processes. That's at least 5 different peace processes in less than a year, including this one, all aimed ostensibly at bringing about some sort of end to the conflict. In a way, this reflects quite perfectly how complex Congo's crisis has become. There are just too many interests, too many actors, and no single roadmap. Until now, with this US-led peace process aiming to bring about everything together under a single umbrella. And the history of peace deals in Congo goes back way further than just 2024. For example, there was the 1999 Lusaka Accords, signed during the Second Congo War. It ultimately failed to stop the war and end the violence in Congo. Then there was the Sun City Agreement, signed in 2002, which ended the war, but failed disastrously at holding military and state leaders accountable for the violence. And then there was the notorious March 23rd Agreement, a peace deal signed between the Congolese government and the CNDP, which was a Rwandan-backed rebel group that would later become who we know today as the M23. Clearly, we see how that peace deal turned out. With so many failed peace processes dotting the landscape of this 30-year war, the question really must be asked: what makes this peace process any different? And what do we really expect to come out of this US brokered peace deal? Well, as I mentioned earlier, unlike many of the previous peace initiatives which have called for dialogues between the DRC and Proxy militias, this process openly and directly acknowledges the Rwandan government as a central player in the conflict, The importance of this really cannot be overstated. It means that there's an avenue within the negotiations for the aggressors in this conflict to be held directly accountable for stoking the violence. Another very important factor is that this deal is also backed by major powers like the US and Qatar, who are putting lots of money and lots of political pressure on the line. The fact that most of the parties involved in these negotiations stand to profit from a lasting peace is grimly promising. So what can we expect from the deal? Well, DRC President Felix Tshisekedi and Rwandan President Paul Kagame are expected to sign the final draft of the peace agreement in Washington, D.C. in mid-June of 2025. While we can't be certain of what's going to happen until the final deal comes out, it's worth noting that the last time Rwanda was directly acknowledged as the aggressor during a peace agreement, the negotiations didn't exactly end well. You see, the current peace process is structured similarly to the 2024 Rwanda Accords, which was widely regarded as the most valuable path to peace for its time. Mediated by the African Union, the Rwanda Accord was special in that it brought both the DRC and Rwanda to the table, acknowledging again that the M23 rebel militia is in fact functioning as an arm of the Rwandan military in eastern Congo. Negotiations almost made it to the end, with the signing of the agreement scheduled for mid-December 2024. But on the day of the signing, Rwandan President Paul Kagame simply didn't show up, and the agreement fell through. So that's the 2025 peace deal in a nutshell. But before we wrap up, here's perhaps the most important thing you need to take away from this video. It's the question of justice. Even if the peace deal goes through and brings about the long-awaited end to the violence in the DRC, the millions of Congolese people who've been suffering for decades, they're not just asking for peace, they're demanding justice. And for what they've been through, justice is the least that they deserve. When you look closely at the peace deal, the declaration of principles, the people at the table, the majority of the subject matter that's being discussed, critical minerals, the money, the economic incentives, it's clear that this is a deal being crafted by elites for elites. The voices of the people, the local Congolese community, of grassroots organizers, of the people who've been the most severely impacted and harmed and dismissed over the decades of conflict, their voices are conspicuously absent from the negotiations. Because here's the thing. While an end to Rwandan-backed violence in Congo will certainly be a welcome reality for countless Congolese people, it probably won't change the status quo of poverty, or of labor exploitation, or of resource extraction, or of corporate tyranny, or of climate disaster, these issues that people face every day. In the end, a lasting peace in Congo is an amazing thing, don't get me wrong. It's what we all want and what we all hope for. Seeing a permanent end to the violence and to the killing and to the fear that the people are experiencing. But we must also treat the peace process not as a destination, but as a meaningful step towards justice. What does justice look like? Justice looks like millions of displaced Congolese people being allowed to return back to their homes that they've been displaced from, that they've longed for every day to return since being pushed off at gunpoint. It looks like Congolese communities being given back their lands to steward, to benefit from, to heal, and it looks like everyday Congolese people having a say in the affairs and direction of their own country, even at the level of international diplomacy. It looks like reparations for suffering and stolen wealth, and it looks like kidnapped family members being returned safely to their loved ones. And it looks like so much more. True peace isn't merely the absence of war. It's the presence of justice. Congolese people deserve justice. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you found this video helpful, if in helping you understand what's been happening in Congo, what is happening right now in Congo, please let us know in the comments. What exactly did you learn? What burning questions do you still have? And if you're excited to learn more about what's happening in Congo, subscribe to the channel and let us know, right? Like, this is the first video we're doing in this style, and we want it to be a series. We really want to create more educational videos about what's happening around the conflict, make everything easier to understand, right? Because we all got to start somewhere. Trust us, we all started somewhere as far as understanding what's happening. We want to empower people all over the world to be stronger allies through this knowledge, educationally and as far as advocacy is concerned, right? But if you don't let us know what you want to know and what you don't know, then we can't make material around that. So please like, subscribe, comment, share this with your friends, do the whole thing. And if you're ready to take it to the next level, visit freecongo.org. That is freecongo.org to take action, to join the movement, and to become a friend of the Congo. Free Congo, free Congo.